Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 for this, our reactions to what may be the worst Singapore Grand Prix we've ever seen. I'm just going to come at it straight away and say that was a dull one. It certainly was. We'll get into all of it and more because there was some interesting bits to talk about in just one moment. Make sure you like and subscribe before we get into any of it. And also, big shout out to our members, Dakota, LaJoyous James, Robin Myers, and Cinnamon Strudel. Before we get into the race itself, we need to talk about something that happened after qualifying yesterday, and that is the qualifying press conference. I don't think I've ever spoken about the qualifying press conference before, because normally nothing ever happens. But leading on from earlier this week, where in the press conference on Thursday, Max Verstappen said a naughty word, it was deemed that he had to do community service as a huge punishment for saying a naughty word. From this, he did some kind of strange protest in the qualifying press conference where he was answering questions but only 1 or 2 word long answers. Then once that press conference was over, held his own press conference within the paddock where he gave full answers that F1 would not have any access to in terms of video. I have to say, it's iconic. The whole thing about him swearing and getting community service, I think, is ridiculous. I've seen today some people on the television on Sky being like, we've got to think of the children. What if the children are watching? It's like, oh, God. It's so sad that children melt if they hear a naughty word. Whatever would they do if they heard Ted Kravitz's analysis on Friday that accidentally went out where he said the F word? All the children would die. It's like, you know what? He said a naughty word. English isn't his first language, and he got brought up at racetracks. He's gonna say naughty words. I think this whole thing is ridiculous. To give community service for someone for saying a swear word is stupid, especially when it comes from the man who turned up drunk to his own prize-giving conference, then gave the world's most ridiculous speech. So I think the whole thing about Max getting community service is stupid. I think the reaction to it has been stupid. The whole think of the children thing is stupid. And I think Max holding his own press conference is a moment that I think this race might be remembered for more than anything else that's happened this weekend, because quite frankly, nothing else has happened. Let's go into this though. We had Lando Norris on pole position, Max Verstappen alongside him. On the way to the grid, Lance Stroll had a brake issue and they were trying to fix his car on the grid. It looked like it was a very last minute thing. The issue didn't appear to pop up again during the race, so it seems like they fixed whatever it was. In terms of tyres, it is Hamilton and Ricciardo on the softs, Magnussen, Stroll, Bottas and Zhou on the hards, everyone else on the mediums. The soft gamble did not pay off. I think they were trying to get maybe a better launch, get some positions from there, but it just really didn't work. And then especially for Hamilton, but for both of them, they were just on the back foot for the remainder of the race from here on out, and were never really able to capture that momentum and just went backwards. So the soft gamble on the start did not work for either man. As we start this race, Lando Norris is able to keep the lead, and for the first time in his career, starts on pole and leads the end of lap 1, as he would lead every lap in this race. Meanwhile, further back, there is a bit of a battle between Hülkenberg and Piastri. Hülkenberg is able to get past Piastri on the start, but Piastri comes back and gets that place back again. The big gainer was Franco Colapinto. Fantastic start for him, gaining 4 positions up to 9th place on the first lap. Meanwhile, Alexander Albon, not very good at all. I think he dropped 4 places down as well. I was quite shocked that his teammates would attack him. But I think, realistically, in his Williams career, this might be the first time he's ever seen his teammate on the track at the same time as him. I'm starting to think maybe Albon is being a little bit discovered here. Because, we all love Albon. Everyone thinks Albon is very good, and Albon is very good. But then you've got to remember, in his Williams era, where he's had this revival to his career, his teammates have been Nicholas Latifi and Logan Sargent, 2 of the worst drivers we've had on the grid over the last few years. And now Franco Colapinto has come in as a rookie and has been pretty close. Joined midway through the season, never driven in Formula One before, scores points on his second race, was just behind Albon in terms of qualifying here today without upgrades on the car, and then really just did Albon at the start. I think a conversation could be started here in terms of has Albon's overall performances that he's been given over the last few years maybe been elevated a little bit because of how bad his teammates have been, and what does this mean for when Carlos Sainz comes in that car next year? Because we know how good Sainz is, because we've seen him alongside the likes of Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc. He has basically always had tough teammates, and we know that he can go wheel to wheel with all of them on his day. So when someone like Sainz goes to Williams and we see him alongside Albon, are we going to be sat here next year going, oh, Albon's really underperforming? I was not surprised. I was not expecting this. Is this a little peep into what's going to happen? That's an interesting story to go into next year. Meanwhile, back to this race. Russell is behind Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton, of course, as I said, on the softer compound tyres, use softs as well, which adds to the confusion as to why they would do this. Russell, of course, is on the radio saying that he would go faster, as any driver would be if they are behind their teammate. Ricciardo is the first to pit from his softs on lap 11. Albon comes in on lap 11. Sainz comes in on lap 14. Albon going very slow after this and goes back to the pits, has to retire the car due to overheating. So it wasn't a great start for Albon, and it just got worse. None of his fault, of course, for the overheating, but that is the end of his race. Lewis Hamilton goes to lap 18 on the softs before pitting, and yes, from there his race just goes downhill. Leclerc is in this DRS train. Hulkenberg in front of him, P5, then it was Alonso, then Leclerc. Leclerc was faster than the two in front of him, but because Alonso had that DRS, he wasn't able to cut through this gap. Eventually, Alonso did drop back a little bit from Hulkenberg without the DRS. Leclerc finally able to get past him for P6 on lap 26. Alonso then immediately pits. A couple laps later, Russell pits as well for the hards, and Leclerc is finally able to get past Hulkenberg on lap 29 for P4. A fantastic move from Leclerc as well, it has to be said. Leclerc, for me, today has been an absolute star. I think he drove really well, and it's one of those big questions of what if? What if he didn't have a bad qualifying is what happened here, because I think he had tremendous pace, especially towards the end of the race as he was chasing down the Mercedes cars. He was so quick, and Ferrari looked so good all through the weekend, apart from in Q3. That one session let down their entire weekend. Meanwhile, back in the race, Perez pits on lap 29 for the hards. Lando Norris reports front wing damage. We see a replay here. He had a huge lockup. He was so lucky. He taps the wall. They report that he has very minor front wing damage. Nothing too serious, though. I mean, seriously, he was so lucky to not get away with that. I mean, if it had been a millisecond later, he is stuck in that wall and they're going to have to pit for a new front wing. Very, very close for Norris, and that would not be the last brush with the wall he would have in this race. Verstappen pits on lap 30 for the hards. Hulkenberg and Colapinto also pit on that lap. Verstappen comes out just behind Charles Leclerc, and I think this goes to show kind of how badly Leclerc's strategy, well, not strategy, but how badly he had been in terms of where he had started, because Verstappen came out behind Leclerc and thought that he'd been undercut by Leclerc's strategy, but it's like, no, Leclerc just hasn't pit yet, so Verstappen was able to get past him pretty easily. Meanwhile, Lando Norris pits on lap 30 for new hard tyres. Doesn't change the front wing because it was fine. Leclerc finally pits on lap 37. Piastri joins him a couple laps later on lap 39. Piastri then goes on a charge, has to make a few overtakes, passes Lewis Hamilton for P4. Leclerc passes Alonso for P7. And now this is when Leclerc is really, really on it from this section. He's setting fastest lap after fastest lap. He gets to the back of Carlos Sainz, and the team orders are played here, telling Sainz to move over. Personally, I feel like he could have done it about half a lap earlier than he actually did. And when we come to the end of the race, we see how close Leclerc was to the back of Russell. Doing it half a lap earlier possibly could have helped Leclerc towards the end of that race. We'll never know, but I feel that Sainz could have been a bit more helpful here. Not that he wasn't helpful, of course, because he did move over in the end. Piastri passes Russell, lap 45 for P3, and begins to chase down Verstappen. Leclerc now is fast again and again and again. This is when Norris taps the Russell wall. The exact same wall that we saw George Russell last year hit the rear tyre and then go off and crash into a wall, ending his race that he looked like he was on course to win with the speed that he had. Norris taps it here. Norris tapped it last year and got away with it. Norris taps it here again and gets away with it. So once again, someone was looking after Lando Norris in this race here because he was dominating it, but was making these little mistakes here and there that for anyone else you'd go, well, that's it, that's the end of their race. But Norris, bulletproof today, not any scratches on him whatsoever. Unlike Kevin Magnussen, who has a puncture on lap 50. He tapped the wall into turn 5, and that was his tyre. He is dead. He is completely gone. Had to do basically an entire lap to get back around to the pits and change those tyres over. Meanwhile, Leclerc has passed Hamilton for P5. Magnussen takes the fastest lap at this point. I thought, this is fantastic for Kevin Magnussen. He's had fastest lap here 2 times before. The record for fastest laps is held by Lewis Hamilton. He's got the fastest lap 3 times. So if Kevin Magnussen kept the fastest lap, he would equal Lewis Hamilton's record for all-time fastest laps at Singapore, and he would have done it in a Haas, which for me makes it even more impressive. But unfortunately, at some point he had track limits on that fastest lap time, so the lap time was deleted and went back to Lando Norris. Magnussen then retires the car on lap 60. At the exact same time, Daniel Ricciardo, on what might be his last ever race, comes into the pits, lap 60 of 62. Meanwhile, Leclerc is on the back of Russell and cannot get past, and as we cross the line, Lando Norris takes the win. He led every lap and he had the fastest lap until he didn't, because Daniel Ricciardo took the fastest lap. He finished dead last, but he took the fastest lap and took that point away from Lando Norris to help out Max Verstappen in the championship battle. I've already seen people on Twitter annoyed at this, saying it's corruption. I say it's part of the game. That's how it is. People say it's not fair that Red Bull have 2 teams. Well, why don't you just go back in time to when F1 was really struggling and tell F1 to ask a different company to heavily invest in the sport to try and keep it alive and buy 2 teams. That's the only way you're going to get rid of these 2 teams Red Bull have, because, you know, F1 was struggling. They asked Dietrich Mateschitz, hey, why don't you buy 2 teams? We really need the help. And he did. And now they can reap the rewards of Lando Norris not getting his first ever Grand Slam. Max Verstappen comes home in P2. I think, honestly, an equally impressive result. I mean, Lando Norris had a fantastic win here, but, you know, Red Bull had no pace through all of Friday. They looked a little bit better on Saturday morning, but to come here and get a front row in P2 is a hell of a lot more than I expected Max Verstappen to get. And now, thanks to Ricciardo taking that fastest lap point away, Verstappen is in the position where if he finished second in every single race and every single sprint race, and Lando Norris wins every single one, Verstappen will still win the World Championship. So I think it's still a high order to finish second at every single race, especially with the Red Bull how it is now. But those big upgrades are coming for the next race in Austin. If they can propel Red Bull back to the front of the grid or back to a position where they were towards the start of the year, then, you know, Max Verstappen is going back onto autopilot in order to win this championship. Oscar Piastri finishes in P3, a great recovery from him from what was a disappointing qualifying. George Russell, with a very underrated drive, I feel is going to be in P4. The Mercedes seem to be probably the 3rd fastest car on the grid, maybe even 4th at times. It really seemed to be struggling, but a P4 from Russell I thought was very impressive. Charles Leclerc in P5 is just a story of if only. You know, if only that lap time in qualifying had not been track limits. If only he'd actually got a good lap time in. I think the Ferrari had the pace here to maybe even challenge Lando Norris at times. You know, in the free air, he was incredible. He was faster than Lando was. So it's a big story of if only for Ferrari this weekend. Lewis Hamilton just got shafted by the strategy, really messed him up. I mean, from the instant they revealed that they were on used softs at the start, it's like, okay, well, your chances are over. What the hell are you doing? So Hamilton could have done a lot better today, but the team apparently didn't want that to happen. Carlos Sainz in P7 is another story of if only. Wasn't anywhere near the pace of Leclerc, but still should have done a lot better than 7th. Alonso had a very good result in P8. I think he'll be happy with that. Drove very well. Points for Hulkenberg in 9th is good as well. Sergio Perez struggled massively this whole weekend, but still comes away with 1 point. Franco Colapinto in P11 is another good result for him in only his 3rd ever race. No upgrades on the car, but still the better of the two Williams on the race day. Yuki Tsunoda in 12th, Esteban Ocon in 13th, Lance Stroll is 14th. In 15th and 16th, we find Zhou and Bottas. The best race of the year for Sauber. Unbelievable. They should be partying tonight with 15th and 16th place for the Sauber cars. I mean, they weren't great, but they survived by not being bad. They made no mistakes all the way through the race and just drove well, you know. And in a Sauber car, if you drive well, you're getting 15th and 16th, and that's what they got. Gasly in 17th and Daniel Ricciardo, the last of the finishers, in 18th place in what might be his last ever race, but takes driver of the day and, more importantly, takes fastest lap away from Lando Norris. Max Verstappen told that on his radio that Daniel Ricciardo took the fast lap away, and he just says, thank you, Daniel, in what might be his final ever F1 race. I mean, you know, he probably doesn't want to go out on a P18, but, you know, taking that fastest lap, getting the driver of the day, I feel, in a way, is quite a good way to finish. It's a storybook ending, if the storybook was quite sad. Anyway, 2 DNFs, 1 for Magnussen and 1 for Alex Albon. That is the Singapore Grand Prix. Not a Singapore classic, not one that I think we will look back on in years to come as a fantastic one. The first ever Singapore Grand Prix with no safety car, no virtual safety car, not even a yellow flag. The continuation of no safety cars carries on. I think the last one we had was in Canada. So it has been a long time. And I said in the preview, you know, we're going to have a gap now of about 3 weeks, so 3 or 4 weeks without any F1. There will be loads of content here on the channel, of course. If you're a member, you can see Friday's video right now. If you're at the Mansell's Mustache membership, you get to see Friday's video right now. But we'll have videos every Friday over these 3 weeks, and then news videos every Saturday if there's news to talk about. But what I was saying is, on the preview I said there's going to be a gap now of no F1, so just enjoy this race, have a fun one, really enjoy it before the gap. And I went into this one, I was like, I'm going to bloody enjoy this one. But it was hard because it was dull. There was big gaps of nothing really happening. Of course, there was no risk to the lead, but, you know, like I said many times on this channel, just because there's no battle for the lead doesn't mean the race isn't interesting. There can be battles elsewhere. And realistically, the only thing to report back was Leclerc, and then towards the end, the thing for the fastest lap. And that was it. Not a classic in any way, but there you go. It's in the books. We'll be back to talk F1 in 3 weeks' time, 3 or 4 weeks' time for the Austin Grand Prix. It is a sprint race weekend. Last year, it was the worst sprint race I've ever seen. Hopefully, this year it'll be better. The Red Bull upgrades will be the big question mark around that race. And of course, who will be in the Racing Bill's seats? But, like I said, we'll have loads of stuff to come on the channel during this break, including driver ratings, which will be out tomorrow. We'll also have videos every Friday on this channel to look forward to. And then if there's any news worth talking about, we'll be talking about it on the Saturdays. So I will see you then. Until next time, have a good one. Goodbye.